Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. All right, what's going on, guys? This is Rob, and I didn't intend to upload this video until Monday, but I changed my mind. And so what we're doing here is we are covering Maestro, part 2, part dos. And this is actually really cool, right? You know, it's written by Peter David. He's the guy who created Maestro, so it's only fitting that he's the one that actually does this. I'm still waiting for the story to beef up a bit. One of the things about Peter David that you guys need to know, right? Those of you guys out there who are not really familiar with Peter David, one of the things you need to know is Peter David takes his time when it comes to writing a story, right? And a lot of writers do, but that's because Peter David's old school, right? Jonathan Hickman kind of writes in the vein of the old school writers. It's one of the reasons why Hickman is really kind of hit and miss, is that if you love like the long drawn out kind of story, like the old Claremont stories or the old Peter David Incredible Hulk run or something like that, then you love Hickman. If you like the more modern era of stories like Donny Cates or somebody like Jeff Lemire, where things are just happening pretty consistently and pretty fast, then it's going to be a little bit of a turnoff. And Peter David's the same way, right? If you like the kind of fast-paced shotgun style of storytelling that you get now, then he's not really the writer for you. But if you're like me and you like the more drawn-out story where it takes a little while to tell a set of events, then you're a fan of that, right? With Maestro, it's a little bit different because it is basically a mini-series. It's only 5 issues long, but this one picks up really with Maestro just kind of talking about how he hoped that MODOK was exaggerating, right? When MODOK had talked about how humanity had basically obliterated itself, that he was hoping he was exaggerating, that he was basically lying because it's what bad guys do. And then he basically says like he wasn't, right? Like that we as people think we know ourselves, right? We think we know what we're capable of. We think we understand the upper limits of what human cruelty can be. And then we somehow find a way to exceed those limits. And that's basically what he realized, that Mount Rushmore itself has been totally destroyed. Hoover Dam was completely wiped out, and all of the various cities around it were all completely flooded. That Las Vegas was totally trashed. And then he kind of comments that not even he as Joe Fixit probably could have done anything about this, which is true. Just nuclear bombs falling. I mean, well, not really even nuclear bombs. The way this devastation looks, and that's what's kind of crazy about this, when the original Future Imperfect story came out, we were kind of given this set of events where it looked like it was the result of a nuclear war that had broken out across the world. But none of this looks like nuclear damage, because when you're talking about a nuclear bomb detonating, one, nuclear bombs don't actually hit the ground. They detonate above the ground to maximize the amount of damage that can be done. And two, because you probably take the risk of just creating a colossal crater on the surface of the world if you detonate a nuclear bomb at ground zero. And then two, usually because of the destructive blast, whether it's because of like the sheer impact of the nuclear bomb or the massive amount of heat that it lets off, none of these buildings would really be standing, right? And so this looks like just conventional bombs, right? Conventional weaponry, but it's one of these things where it doesn't really look like atomic explosions. No, more so than that, while there is this indication of radiation, it may be one of these things where when it came to smaller places, or not really smaller places, some places received nuclear bombardment, other places didn't, right? So whatever the case is, the idea of radiation is given to us in two ways. The first is because Maestro ends up coming across some animals who had basically died of what looked like radiation poisoning, right? They didn't realize the plants that they were eating and the water they were consuming was irradiated, right? And so they basically ended up dying from that. But from there, he kind of ends up taking off. One thing to bear in mind, Maestro has not become the Maestro that we know, right? He's not like the dark, twisted character. At this point, he's still just the Incredible Hulk. And one of the cornerstones of the Hulk's character was that he was largely a peaceful character until you pissed him off, right? But like if you just left him alone and he was just kind of wandering out there in the wilderness by himself, he was very peaceful and very calm because he likes to just kind of be left alone, right? That's kind of Peter David referencing his work, Bill Mantlow's work, Roy Thomas's work. The idea that the Incredible Hulk just likes to be left in peace. That's the old school Incredible Hulk stuff. But regardless, while he's there and he ends up seeing that basically the Washington Monument is almost totally destroyed. And this is kind of what I'm talking about. Like it looks like Washington DC was hit with a nuclear bomb just because of the sheer lack of anything surrounding the Washington Monument. You have like stuff like the Lincoln monuments there just because it was built so well, right? It would withstand a nuclear bombardment. Nobody would live who was there, but like it would be able to withstand it. But he ends up seeing this kid who's running off. Now the kid jumps down a trapdoor and he in turn follows suit, right? And this is one of the funny things about the Hulk, because as soon as he gets down there, you have all these guys who are just kind of like freeze, right? Like stop where stop or we'll shoot. And he's like, okay, I've got an itch on my back. Like if you guys don't mind focusing your fire there, it'll definitely help. Like it'll definitely make me feel better. And that's when he's met by the arrival of Aaron Stack, right? Machine Man. And Aaron Stack always seems to find a way to survive. Now here's the funny thing about this. I think if I'm a betting man, if I'm being honest with you guys, I think this is because of Earth X. I really think that's the reason why, right? Aaron Stack was never really a relevant or interesting character character before Earth X, right? Before that story was done, before Alex Ross did that, he was never an interesting character. But that story kind of gave us like this crazy looking, dystopian future from the perspective of the Watcher Uatu and Aaron Stack himself, right? And that's kind of what catapulted him into being a pretty popular character. In more recent years, it's been what's going on in the Iron Man comics, which still doesn't make him any more interesting, but he's kind of a guy that always basically ends up making it. And what we end up finding out here is that the White House has been totally destroyed, right? I mean, it's standing, but it's just been, nobody survived, right? The president, the vice president, the cabinets, Congress, they're all gone, right? Like they're all basically dead. And those individuals who survived that bombardment have taken refuge in the bunkers below Washington, DC, and they've just kind of lived there ever since, right? They've had their children and so on and so forth, and it's just people who live. But the other thing about this is that the idea of there being an ordered government is basically gone, right? There really is no government anymore. It's just survivors. And this is an important thing. And the reason why is because there's all kinds of philosophical philosophical papers and stuff like that that are being written about what happens when society returns to a state of nature, which is to say a world with no ordered government whatsoever. And one of the things they kind of hit at, and really even with Thomas Hobbes, was kind of like a perpetual and permanent war of all against all, like basically a constant war over resources. But regardless of who you go with, the general consensus is that if something like that were to happen, right, we were to have some kind of war take place in the US and there's no ruling faction, there's no federal organization that's basically governing over the American people, then what you would see is a rise of strong men, right, and petty warlords. And that's it, right? Just individuals out there who were strong enough to just kind of maintain their own region, and then somebody may come along with the power to overtake them, and then they would take that region from them and then rule it themselves, right? But that's all you would really see. You really wouldn't see the restoration of a government or anything like that. And that's kind of the story of the Maestro, basically kind of looking at this and realizing this is dystopia. Now, dystopia is in the remnants of what used to be New York, right? But the other thing about this is that once the Incredible Hulk leaves, and he's basically told, like, the person who governs over dystopia at the moment, his name is Maestro, right? So there's a person named Maestro governing over dystopia at the moment. He's like, okay, I've got to meet this guy, right? And so he ends up kind of taking off and then starts to succumb to radiation, not in the sense that it kills him, but in the sense that it makes him dizzy and it makes him a little exhausted, and he kind of starts to pass out. But then suddenly he hears this weird buzzing sound from out of nowhere, and it's like these giant bugs that show up and basically start consuming him or start attacking him. Now, this is Peter David referencing his own story, Incredible Hulk: The End, right? I don't know how many of you guys ever read that story. It's depressing. It's good, but it's so sad, right? Like, a little bit of a sidetrack here. Incredible Hulk: The End was a story very similar to this, right? Where basically war had broken out across the world and pretty much all the superheroes had died and pretty much all of humanity had died, right? There wasn't really anybody else. It was just the Incredible Hulk and his Bruce Banner persona. And the Bruce Banner persona was growing old and basically kind of, dying more or less, but it was the Incredible Hulk still holding on to his hatred for Banner. And so there comes a point when the Banner persona ends up dying, right? Like, of old age, he just dies of a heart attack. And so the Banner persona dies and the Incredible Hulk's the only one left. And he's just like, Hulk is alone. And he is. The Incredible Hulk is the only survivor on Earth. Everything else is gone. There's no humans, no nothing, right? Just the Incredible Hulk. But over the course of that story, one of the things that happens is these giant bugs descend on him every single day and completely and totally consume him, and then he just ends up regrowing because of his healing factor. Like, he deals with that every single day. It's really dark, but it is incredibly good. It's an amazing story. But unlike what we saw in Hulk: The End, Maestro is not totally consumed. Instead, these kind of sonic waves come out of nowhere and then basically chase off these various bugs, only for the Incredible Hulk to basically be rescued by a handful of individuals. Now, once he wakes up at their location, we find out these are the Wasteland survivalists, right? From the Future Imperfect story. These are the folks that have basically made their way and survived in what are considered the wastes, which is to say the territories out there that don't really have any kind of ordered government and don't really have any radiation. The biggest issue these folks have to cope with are bandits, right? Just bandits who show up here, try to ransack their stuff, and then leave, right? That's the biggest issue they have to cope with. But with Maestro kind of looking out onto the horizon and then basically seeing dystopia, then his question is like, is that dystopia? And they're told yes. Like, the Hulk says, tell me about Maestro, and the guy's like, they say he's God. And so he's like, okay, now I got to meet this guy. Now from here, we pick up with Rick Jones. Now Rick Jones, as he's shown here, is kind of a character who's just there. But because this goes, seemingly into Future Imperfect, Rick Jones was an exceedingly important character, right? But you see him using all these little knickknacks, kind of having all these little artifacts, right? He's got like Bucky Barnes' arm back there in the background, right? He's got the head of Vision, he's got Spider-Man mask, he's got Thor's hammer, he's got, Magneto's helmet, there's the body of Wolverine. He just got all these little things here and there, right? Like all these little trinkets and so on that basically he just kind of collects. But he ends up being met by Janice. Now, of course, Janice was also an important character in the Future Imperfect storyline, and I'm kind of waiting to see where Peter David goes with this, because if he ends ends up basically offering an explanation, it would be redundant to do it here. But if in the next few issues he doesn't, then I'll make this all make sense, right? For these characters. I'm not gonna leave you guys hanging. But Janice basically comes in and says, like, Grandpa, he's back. And he's like, what are you talking about? He's like, that great big green hulking guy that you always talked about. He's like, the Incredible Hulk? Janice is like, he walked right into town square, right? He walked right into downtown as big as life. And so it's like, okay, so like the Incredible Hulk's back, right? Now at that point, we switch back over to Hulk himself and kind of walking around and looking at everything and just being like, God, this used to be Times Square at one point. How crazy is it how far humanity has fallen so fast, right? Like we went from like this technologically advanced society, or at least, you know, relatively advanced, to basically being like this hodgepodge community where folks are just barely making it by. And so he tells one of the people, like, I want to meet the Maestro. And he's told like, nobody meets the Maestro, right? He's like, do I look like nobody? You know? And so like this emissary kind of pops out of nowhere and says like, I'm the minister, right? I'm the minister of the Maestro. The Maestro dispatched me to bring you to him, right? The Maestro wants to meet you. And so that's when you end up having Hulk following this guy. And as he gets in there, it's obvious that dystopia exists in two different ways. Basically, people who are out there in dystopia, the downtrodden, barely making it by. And then you've got the Maestro in his territory, and you've got people who basically live in more or less opulence, right? I mean, they just kind of live and they're carefree, and, you know, they obviously have enough to eat, different things like that. So they're not really struggling. It's very reminiscent of the kind of issues you see when it's like the upper class versus the lower class, right? You see like the czars of Russia, you know, in years past, and like all the people who were there, which eventually gave rise to the Bolsheviks, right? The Bolshevik Revolution, the eradication or the execution of the Tsarist family, which gave birth to like Leninist communism and you know, Vladimir Lenin, Leon Trotsky, and then eventually Joseph Stalin, all that kind of stuff. But like, that's kind of what you see here. The super high class versus the super low class, which always leads to revolution. And so what you end up having is the Incredible Hulk greeted by the Maestro. And he's like, Banner, like, I'm so glad to see you. It's been an age. And we end up finding out the person ruling over everybody right now is none other than Hercules, meaning the Incredible Hulk is gonna fight Hercules, which is gonna be amazing. With that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.